It's a 5.
Jess, the topic that your die roll is determined we will discuss is one added relatively recently by Aaron. Do you use pre-made adventures or do you write your own?
Nice.
Hello and welcome to Roll for Topic, a roundtable discussion about running role-playing games. Each episode our guest rolls on our table of topics and we discuss the result. My name is Chris Salzman.
And I'm Andy Rao.
And this week we are joined by our special guest, Jess Snyder.
Hey everyone, it's great to be here. Hello.
Hello. Welcome back. You were an early guest.
I was.
Way back when. Yes.
Do you remember what you discussed with us, Jess?
I think I shared with you the long and rambling story of my first game of D&D, which is always interesting and fun. And I think we talked a bit about Session Zeros, too.
That sounds about right. And then you added, I think, one of our favorite topics on the table, the Doors question. I think that was you.
It still haunts me.
Yeah, it haunts us too. We had a good half-hour discussion about it, I think, and I'm still I've got more thoughts about it.
Yeah. I think Chris and I had a legit discussion of should we start a podcast just for Doors after that episode? Yeah. So
the passageways.
All right. Well, before we get into our official topic, right? So I mentioned this to you before we hit record. So I have a personal story that I think is kind of relevant to GMing. So this morning I was very stupidly using a chisel, and it slipped and it sliced my finger up quite a bit.
Oh no!
So I went to the ER, and I'm going to show you this. We have some video over here, and I'll show you the video.
Oh no!
And so they gave me some stitches and stuff. So it got me thinking quite a bit about what it means to take slashing damage. Right? So in a D&D style game, what happened to me would have been maybe a hit point, or that might have just been the GM being and you take a small scratch, right? But instead I'm holding back tears as a nice woman is stitching me up this morning. Yeah, so just it made me really start thinking about what do we actually mean when we say hit points, and what the real world consequences and stuff are of that. And then yesterday our friend Murph, who's also been on the show, was talking about running Blades in the Dark, and he said that his players were having trouble sort of wrapping their mind around the concept of if you take damage you have to go to a doctor, right? You don't just do a long rest and get all your HP back.
I was thinking while I was driving the other day about kind of the inherent trauma that we don't really talk about with D&D of being almost killed all the time and taking extremely painful wounds and really awful, terrible situations and magical damage, and then being expected to just be fine the next day. I'm there's some psychological consequences there that we don't really bring to the table that would be kind of interesting to explore.
Yeah, I think so, because it's you take you drink a potion of healing or something like that, and then that's going to heal your arm? I guess it's magic, right? So whatever.
So maybe, yeah, but I don't know.
Have either of you guys heard of a paper and pencil RPG called Torchbearer?
No.
It's not officially related, but it feels very inspired by a computer RPG called Darkest Dungeon. I think I'm getting the name right.
Yeah.
But the central premise of it is that you are managing your team of adventurers, and while you do go into dungeons and you fight stuff and you take physical damage, the big emphasis is on the long-term trauma that you just compiles and builds over time as you send people over and over into these dangerous situations.
Yeah.
So, it is something that you don't...
It's a real light romp.
Yeah, there are game systems that have, systems for trauma or insanity and things along that spectrum from the realistic to very goofy, but they don't tend to really link it to the constant acts of violence that you're experiencing, right? Which is probably where most of this...
and experiencing.
Right.
Yeah, which is where probably most of the real life trauma would come from, were you a professional adventurer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been the weekly game that I run... in game, I started doing the math, and they've really only been sort of on the road for about a month or so. But they're level 8 at this point, so a lot's happened in that month, and I've just started thinking maybe they need a break, right? Talk to a therapist, maybe sleep in a couple days,
unwind, go to a spa, take a minute.
Yeah.
This reminds me, playing a lot of role-playing games in like the late 80s and 90s, where there's this whole slew of games that were where the whole premise was basically, I'm going to make D&D, but I'm going to fix the like egregiously unrealistic parts of it. Yeah. And one of the big one of the first things that gets changed is the damage, like hit point system, because everyone looks at it and is like, this is so unrealistic. It's so unrealistic that someone with 1 hit point left is still operating at full capacity until they hit 0, and then they're just out, And so you get all these wonderfully, often very convoluted, slightly more realistic damage systems that are, not fun in any way to play. But,
feel a little more true. Yeah, that was something in the last session I ran. We don't really have a mechanic for called shots in my game, and I don't know if 5e really has. I think maybe one of the feats has maybe more of a called shot kind of option to it. But, the player was saying like, oh, I hit, I want to go after the wings of this creature. And I was like, oh, I don't, like, yes, of course, we'll play it in game, but I don't really have a mechanic for, more specific kinds of damage or like more specific ways of operating at lower hit point systems. There's not a great way to do that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, you could almost, if you wanted to get tricky with that, assign a hit point value to just the wings.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. But then it's like, I don't know. Then it turns into a video game, I think.
Yeah.
At that point. All right, well, let's dive into our topic at hand. Thank you for that diversion. But yeah, so Aaron had asked this really good question, I think, about using pre-made adventures or writing writing your own. And I think sort of a subset of writing your own is, do you just improv the whole thing? That's sort of an option as well in there. So yeah, maybe let's go around. Like I'll start, right? So I mostly use pre-made adventures, although for one shots and shorter things, I will always write my own. That's sort of the time that I use to write my own stuff. Yes. What about you, Jess? What do you
do? Historically, I have run mostly pre-written. The very first RPG I tried to write was based on, I think I talked about this a little last time, Garth Nix's Sabriel, Lyriel, and a Porcelain system. And I tried to write like a one-off about it, but quickly realized the magic system was convoluted, hit points are hard, knowing where things are supposed to be and having a sense of continuity took a lot of time. So I've written a couple, kind of like you, Chris, maybe not quite one-shots, but small little arcs. And that's fun for me, but for larger world campaigns, I use pre-written.
What about you, Andy?
Similar to you guys, I suppose. I mostly use pre-written adventures, although, and I think we can get into this as we explore the topic, I end up heavily rewriting them almost to the point where I'm not really sure why I felt the need to start with a pre-written adventure, but there's just something about having something to fall back on, I guess. But yeah, mostly pre-written adventures. Like you, if it's a one-shot or something like that, I'm more likely to whip something up myself, depending on the players and the time and stuff like that.
Will either of you improv like entire sessions, or do you always have to have something pre-written?
I get really anxious about the idea of improving. I have friends who that's almost their entire GM style. The prep doesn't bring them a lot of joy, and so they'll even do like Mad Lib games or things like that to just determine the session, which I have a lot of respect for. But no, I usually have like my Google Doc, my second Google Doc, the adventure guide, like some handwritten notes. That just helps me feel more comfortable.
So if you have all that in place, and this is like the thing that I always wonder about over prepping, it's like, do you give yourself any latitude to go off script then within that? Or are you always going to be like, I wrote it down in the Google Doc, so I really need to stick to that?
Yeah, I think maybe why I love the pre-written adventures, because they do such a good job of creating a world. It's almost like a safety net. Like I haven't found too many situations where my players have wanted to do something that I couldn't at least get like a small thread to work with, and be like, yeah, okay, there's probably, it says there's this kind of temple over here, and we'll make a slight adjustment. Yeah, absolutely. Like, the god you're seeking can be found here. So I guess, yeah, kind of like you, Andy, I do probably a lot of modification on that base, depending on what we're trying to do. But I don't know. I always find it easier to kind of have that substrate to work with.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense, and I've definitely felt that too. Yeah, if you can, it answers a lot of questions for you that you probably haven't anticipated. Then later on, you come back to, you're like, oh, okay, yes, this is useful because someone's already thought about the geography of this town, for example. It can be really useful. Yeah, so Andy, when you say like you rewrite stuff, Like, how far do you go with that? Are you changing names of everything just to make it look like it's your totally own thing, or?
Almost everything is up for grabs, honestly. I feel more stress when I'm trying to improvise stuff than I do when I'm running something I've read and can refer to. So I don't go out of my way to change stuff, but it just happens, and yeah, almost nothing can't be changed.
It's a very like nihilistic approach to life. Yeah.
When you guys use the pre-written ones, how much do you do? Like, I find myself doing like an hour or two of review before I run it, either like the day before or earlier in the day, depending on when. How much time do you guys feel like it requires of you to become acquainted with the section that you're running?
It depends on how well it's written. So I'm running Horde of the Dragon Queen right now, and I have fallen very out of love of it as we've been going on through it. It's just, there's these huge, travel sections, and that's just not something that like gets me interested at all. So I've just been finding I've just been like cutting stuff left and right just to sort of get to the next dungeon, essentially. But when I have to prep, it's like a 2-to-1, right? So like if the session's going to be an hour long, I'll probably need about a half an hour, right, to prep for it. That's what I should ideally do, but it rarely happens. So sometimes it's like as we are playing, I might give them something to think about so I can read a page ahead. But
I tend to spend a little bit more time than that. I usually find a sort of rule of thumb that I need to spend at least as much time as I anticipate playing prepping. And if I can spend more time than that, I will. But that doesn't always happen due to life and things like that.
Is that like a hard one rule for you that you have to do that? Like, have you just found that if you don't prep, then the whole session goes terribly?
It's because I'm scared that the session will go terribly if I don't prep. I don't know if it's actually true that it would go terribly because, because like I said, I'm okay with improvising on the fly. So I don't know. It's probably just a weird hang up of mine. Jess, how would you answer your own question? What sort of prep do you do?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty close to you, Andy. It seems to be like a 1-to-1 type ratio. And I find that's actually where a lot of my modifications often happen. Like I'll be reading ahead the night before. And I'm running Tombs of Annihilation right now. And my players are of a higher level. They're level 6. And like you, Chris, the travel portion in the beginning is really written for levels 1 through 5. And my players have very politely let me know they want encounters to be harder. So I spend a lot of time looking at the monsters as written, trying to calculate my CR, getting it harder, finding, trying to roughly get monsters that would potentially be in this area, even though I don't stick to that too terribly closely. So yeah, I find that it's a 1-to-1 ratio, and that allows me the space to kind of customize it or make it a little more interesting. So
I want to ask some questions in a few minutes about, what you hope to see when you crack open a pre-written adventure and what you dread seeing. But one question I have is, what kind of approach to a pre-written adventure do you personally find more workable? Do you prefer when an adventure is a pretty clear plot and that the writing of the adventure is structured around that plot? Or do you prefer that the pre-written adventure is more of like a toolbox for the area or the location with adventure seeds, and you're expected to do a little bit more of customizing the storylines and plots and adventure seeds in it? What do you guys prefer to work with?
I definitely prefer a plot heavy focus to it. I don't do well with like, here's 5 pages of different factions that all have these different NPCs and do what you want with it. I'm like, well, no, like tell me what the through line is, right? Like, why are we doing this? What's sort of the interesting place to explore in that? Mostly because it's like players can't keep that many NPCs in their head, and I certainly can't. So it's like, what's the point, right? Like, just distill this down to sort of the clear and present danger. So my vast preference is, if I'm looking at something, it's like, hey, here's the maps, sort of, and like here's the plot that gets you from this map to sort of the next map, is what I really want to see. Because everything else, like that, to me, is pretty easy to improvise, I guess. Like some of those kind of the social stuff or the travel, right? We can make a determination if it's just like, okay, you're there, or let's make it, have an encounter or two along the way.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I kind of take the other approach. I find that if I am GMing a pre-made adventure that is very plot focused. It is if and when we go off the plot rails, it's harder for me to get back on them if I really only have one plot that I'm kind of prepared to run, if that makes sense. If I have, on the other hand, kind of internalized the region and the factions and things like that in the area, I find it a little bit easier for my brain to recover and take advantage of derailing. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, it totally makes total sense. Yeah.
How about you, Jess?
I love the plot as well, kind of like Chris. I think that like the different criminal factions and politics and religions add a ton of richness to it, and I can pull a lot of like little plot hooks, and I love it when my players take advantage of those too. Like I think that's wonderful. But they don't interest me. Like I'm not driven to create them. I don't, not unlike you, Andy, I don't really find myself finding connections or friction with them. So if those are established and kind of some conflicts are already laid out for me, and like the challenge is laid out, I find it a lot easier to kind of work my way around and tie everyone into it and make sure that all the players feel like they've got something that their character feels compelled towards.
Yeah.
Thinking about that, in the last couple of years, I have learned a lot from reading and running parts of a pre-made campaign for the One Ring. It's called the Mirkwood campaign. The Darkening of Mirkwood. One thing I like about it, and I assume this was a deliberate design choice on their part, although it's possible it just is the way it turned out, is that it's a long campaign. It's intended to last many years of in-game time, and it would probably take you, a year or two of regular playing to play through it as a group. And the early parts of this campaign are very plot focused, where there's a really clear plot line that you're following. But the farther you get into it, I guess the more it steps back from the plot, because I think it's because the farther you get in, the farther off your players have necessarily gone off the rails. And so as it goes on, it steps back a little bit more and starts talking more about these are the factions, and if your players have been doing this, then take these things into account. And so you do have to do more work, but but there's not that sense that like this pre-written campaign is worthless 2/3 of the way in because we are so far off the beaten path.
That's a really interesting way of approaching it. Yeah, I think I've definitely even felt that too. Like when you take a group from like level 1 to level 5 or 3 or something like that. At that point, they have created all sorts of reasons why they're an adventurer. So it's like, why would you then kind of keep steering them onto something else that they're not quite interested in if they already have all these other motivations and expectations and stuff?
So let me follow up on that and then just ask you guys, are there some examples of pre-written adventures you've really enjoyed running, and do you think you'd be able to articulate what made them really good? Are there any adventures that helped you out by the way they were written or by the way they were designed in a way like I just described?
Like I said, I'm running Tombs of Annihilation right now, and it has a large hex crawl portion in the, I guess, beginning middle-ish. And it's interesting because the players are there to resolve a death curse, right? To figure out why people who have been resurrected are dying. But they don't know who, they don't know where, they don't know how to find information. The city they start in, that information is not there. And I like it because there's a ton, I think you have to go find a guide as part of your initial part in the island of Chult. And there's 10, I think, guides that the guide provides to you, and they give you images and a bio and kind of those person's motivations. And all of them will potentially lead you to ultimately finding the Tombs of Annihilation that they have to work their way through. And I think that's really neat. It kind of, it starts, so I came into this game out of Minds of Phandelver. So they had been playing together for, an adventure. They knew who each other was. And so I think because the group was a little more established, it had room for some of that fuzziness. Because they still don't know where to go next. They just resolved a big boss fight. They lost a player. They have a guide who's going to help take them, I think, to an oracle next. I'm going to have to read and find out what's next. But yeah, it's been very nebulous. And I told them, I'm like, there's a lot of options. trust the game, trust me, we will get you where you know, I'm not going to railroad you, but we will get there. The game will continue. We're going to continue in this premise of fun and adventuring. So don't stress too much about making the right choice. See what's interesting, see what goes. And the game system definitely provides all ample opportunity, I think, for that to happen.
When you get to that point with the guides, then are you going to prep all 10 of them, or are you going to only give them a subset of the guides?
I think I gave them 8 of the 12. And then they proceeded to have like a magical adventuring job interview, which I was not prepared for. Yes. So they're quizzing me about my magical qualifications, and I'm like, oh, I thought you'd just pick one off the message board, take it down from the tack board. But no, I got to go on a magical job interview. So that was pretty fun.
Super fun.
I think that when given that sort of situation, I mean, you can always just ask, what is the most ridiculous thing that the players are going to make me do?
Yeah, I should have known, right? I should have known.
That's great.
So yeah, I picked about 8 of them that I thought, some of them, I mean, some of them I just didn't think that were interesting, or they just didn't fit well with the characters. So but I gave them, I think, 8 choices. All of those had plot hooks and various compelling interests that would move them further into the island and provide more information for them. So
that's great. I would have given them 2. Like, yes, you're a better
this
GM.
This guy.
Yeah.
I would have given them all 12, but whichever one they picked would have the personality and story of exactly the one that I picked.
That's tricky.
That's funny. That's really funny.
Yeah.
Something else I find I appreciate in adventures is pre-written adventures is when they use kind of layout and design to help me out a bit. So, that means obviously making, putting maps on the same page as the descriptions of the stuff that happens there, and, some practical things like that. But I know some companies like Monte Cook Games does this with this Numenera stuff. They make good use of sidebars with like little reminder references about rules from the core book and stuff like that. So, if there's some monster appears that, I'm making this example up, but it has, a lightning attack, the sidebar might say, see the lightning attack section in the core rulebook on page 232 or something. In games like Mothership, which has really neat graphic design, I think there's a lot of opportunity that some people are starting to pick up on to use the design and sometimes the physical design of adventures to make them more usable for GMs, I guess. So
yeah, I my 9 to 5, I work as a technical writer, and I'm in a master's program for professional writing. And so I actually spend a lot of time thinking about the way the documents are laid out. What information do they present? What order? What's their nomenclature? How do I organize myself within this text, right, as a GM? And if I'm printing stuff out or like removing pieces from the book to make it a little more easy to carry around with me, like how easy is it to do that? And I think that's one of the things that sets apart a good pre-written system from a interesting but poorly designed pre-gen is honestly like the technical and rhetorical layout of that document.
Yeah, that's great. We could probably talk about like layout. That should be a whole question.
Yeah, it could be.
One thing that I like, so Hoard of the Dragon Queen, right, which I'm reading, is like not well laid out. So it was published at a time where Wizard of the Coast was really pushing sort of this like, I don't know, this like synergy between like website stuff and book stuff at the same time, but before D&D Beyond and stuff, right? So like there's a whole section of monsters that you have to go download a PDF from their website. And so what ends up happening is, you have to go and print this off. So now you're carrying 2 documents, right? So now all of a sudden you have 2, and it's not clear like which enemies are going to be in the PDF versus which are just going to be in the book, versus which ones are just going to be in the monster manual, and all sorts of stuff like that. So you just run into these issues where like I'm juggling all sorts of different pieces of information trying to find out which one has the thing in it. And then same thing like what you were saying, Andy, with the maps and stuff, the descriptions for the rooms are often split, a page or 2 away. So you're just constantly flipping back and forth and trying to figure out like, where you are, in the universe, or taking time to redraw it yourself. Right. Like, and then that's like, well, okay, then why do I have the book?
Yeah, well, thinking beyond, layout, but certainly including it. I mean, one of the things that makes a really good pre-made adventure, I think, is when the author has put some time into, like, what is the GM going to have to do that I can save them the trouble? Whether it's, am I going to make them have to look up like things in a stupid PDF somewhere, then I should save them the trouble and put those stats here in the book. I mean, there's probably a million little things like that. And if you're able, if it's a really obscure rule, why not just don't expect me to look up the rule for grappling in the core book if it's complicated. Just summarize the rules for me in the adventure. There's probably a lot of little opportunities to just think like, what is the GM going to have to do that I could just eliminate with this document?
I agree.
So when you write your own then, Andy, right, so this is your big chance to be the big publisher and fix all the problems. When you're writing your own stuff, I guess, what are the sorts of notes and things like that you give yourself? Is there like classifications of notes that you're always writing down?
Oh my goodness. This is going to be an unsatisfying answer. I have been blessed in that I have not written adventures intended for publication or really for use by other people.
Yeah.
So when I write stuff, it's just a hot mess of disorganized notes.
Yeah.
It will be like a crudely sketched map and then labels that mean something to me like for like a week, but then if I were to come across it like 6 months later, I would have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about. Random numbers and names of spells and scrawled in the margins, that sort of thing. I mean, but you are asking how might I go about structuring an adventure, and that's a great question that I don't know, I'll have to think about that for a minute. How would so you guys talk a little bit about how you would answer that question?
Yeah, so I just finished. So Jess, you actually played in this. I just finished a one shot that was like a 2-session thing. So I came up with that whole little adventure, by myself with some direction based on character choices and stuff like that. But that was pretty fun to do. And what I ended up doing was doing a lot of drawing a couple maps out beforehand and then having the NPCs sort of sorted out. Like I wanted to have these kind of particular NPCs with these personalities. And then from there, that first session left it pretty open to sort of see what was going to happen. And then the second session, that's when I really kind of sat down and kind of built a dungeon around it. And I'll peel back the curtain a little bit, right? So that dungeon had to get edited on the fly based on some time constraints that we ran into. But yeah, so I had a whole other set piece that had to get cut and, kind of merge things together on the fly, which is sort of the advantage of if you wrote your own thing, it's easier to improv that because it's just it was all in your head anyway, so you can quickly kind of redo it. The other thing, and I want to give credit to my daughter, is there was one sort of set piece room in that dungeon, and I just asked her hey, what should castles have? And she said mirrors. There's got to be mirrors. So we had this big mirrored throne room, which ended up being a really fun setup for an encounter in there. But yeah, so approaching writing my own, right? Steal from whatever you want, ask your kids what they would add to a dungeon, those sorts of things. But then I think when you're writing your own stuff, I think that's where you do have the ability to allow improv to sneak in. I think even a little bit more than with pre-made stuff, because if it came from your head, right, you're probably can figure out how to fit another piece into it on the fly.
Yeah, those are some good thoughts.
Yeah, I ran a one-shot this summer that, oh gosh, it was the cover said it was supposed to run for 4 to 5 hours, right? Mm-hmm. So I blocked off 6 because I'm well, that's never accurate. Yeah. And we were at hour 6, and there was still the final big bad. We hadn't even entered the room. And so I was just aha, ta-da! There it is, because I'm tired of doing this. I could tell everyone was they had to go. They were just, 6 hours is a long time. But yeah, if I had written it, it would have been a lot easier to chop that around. But
yeah, you would have had a rough idea of what needs to just get removed so you can get to that final.
Yeah.
I don't know about you guys, but I often find that the pre-written adventure is not the document I really want or use at the table. I usually create sort of a version of that information that I actually refer to while I'm GMing. So I will read, if it's just a 32-page adventure, I will thoroughly read through it, but then I will probably either photocopy or redraw, key maps and make, notes of my own to trigger my, my memory of the read through of the adventure. We've all been in games where the GM is flipping through pages and hang on, I've got to look up that detail. And I don't know, I find that most physical adventures are not usually all that great to have at the table.
Andy, so I have a question for you, right? So you've been gaming for let's just say a while. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
Are there pre-written adventures that you come back to quite a bit, kind of in different, like, yeah, throughout the different decades and stuff? Or are there any that really stick out to you as like, if everybody read this one or ran this one, they would understand GMing better? Or this is like a really classic example of, something?
Oh, that is such a good question. I don't know if I'm going to have a good answer for you. I definitely have like a list of like my 5 go-to adventures. And they tend to be lowish level adventures that, and I apologize here, I'm just sort of thinking out loud. They tend to be low level adventures, partly because, most of us run more low stuff at the low levels than at the high levels. And a good low level adventure, really, if it's well done, it will capture so much of what the whole game is about. If it's self-consciously an introductory adventure, there's that pressure and that importance of like communicating just the excitement of what this game is all about. So because of the times when I have been most heavily running games, I have a couple of adventures from kind of the old days that I would run anytime and for anyone in any fantasy system. And then there's a cluster of adventures released during the 3rd edition D&D era that I think just really nailed it and are just good examples of adventures. And again, it's usually because they just embrace the like, we've got one adventure to sell this a whole experience and hobby to potential players. So yeah. Sorry, that's probably not the specific answer you were looking for.
No.
If I gave you specific adventure things, it would be like, the introductory adventure from like the 1980s Middle-earth role-playing game rulebook. It would mean nothing to most listeners here, but I don't know. I do have a list of favorites I will pull out, but
yeah, I mean, I would be interested in seeing that, right? At some point, so maybe you could share that. And
I'll list out a couple of them. Yeah. I'll sit down and list them out, and we'll make them available, and maybe we can just quickly read them in a future episode.
So I've run the Lost Mines of Phandelver a couple times, and like I really like that adventure. And since I've run it a few times, like it's sort of like I understand it well enough that I could probably just run it, without any prep, right? Like at this point. So I've thought about that, like if that just becomes sort of the thing that I run every couple of years, right? That could be a pretty fun thing to have in the back pocket, right? Like a pretty fun adventure just to have prepped and sort of ready to go. But it does make me think it's like, well, I should find a couple more like that I just have sort of always ready. And for any group that wants to play, right? So then it's not a big deal to get like everything together. It's just like, oh, just show up and we'll play, right?
Yeah, I would love to have that. There's some really great like Reddit threads you can search for, your favorite one shots or your favorite intro adventures, and those are so helpful. Like you said, to just have stuff prepared and ready. And I got a level 3 something that'll be great. It'll be 4 hours. We can do it. That's awesome.
One of my 2020 goals, or I don't know, just goals for the future of playing games, is to do much shorter campaigns. So rather than these long multi-year campaigns, like really aim for, hey, it's going to be 2 sessions or 3 sessions, something like that, so people can drop in and out quite a bit easier. And then I think too, you can just try lots of stuff a bit better. I'm not ready to sit down, I think, right now and take someone from level 1 to 20. You give up lots of opportunities, right? It's kind of an opportunity cost thing to try different adventures and different systems and stuff.
Well, I was wondering, how often do you guys use a published adventure not to run the actual plot or adventure in it, but to just because you thought hey, this looks like it's probably full of interesting encounters or monsters or ideas or NPCs, and you repurpose them for something else? Or do you typically only buy an adventure if you plan to run it?
I only buy it if I'm going to run it. It's like there's too much free stuff on the internet, and there's too many like random ideas I have in my head to just run stuff that, I don't think I would. I don't know. I try to not buy stuff that I'm not going to run, although that's like a total lie, right? Like, yes, but it's
we know, Chris. We know.
I guess whenever I think about buying stuff, I'm always thinking about like buying physical books, but then you look at like the Dropbox PDFs section for my RPG stuff, and like that's just
Yes.
It's a
That's
while.
100 titles deep.
Yeah. I on Reddit found a really, I can't remember the name of the subreddit, but for a while there, someone was posting an NPC every week. And
Ooh.
at that point, I was writing a little Feywild murder mystery, little small arc, and I used, oh God, I think I used 3 or 4 of their NPCs and roped them in because I don't know, that's something I struggle with is making like interesting NPCs and compelling NPCs. And so I thought that was perfect. I'm like, oh my goodness, great motivations, build, cool name, interesting backstory, fantastic, and was able to take those and just plunk them in. And I think it brought a lot of richness and interest. So
That's
that
super
sounds
cool.
great.
Did you try to modify them at all, or are you just like, this is just a hodgepodge of characters and we'll figure out how they're connected?
I think I probably changed the race and stuff occasionally, but that just took so much of the unfun. Okay, what's their stat build? What weapons? Like, who are they loyal to? What spells do they have? I don't know. That doesn't bring me. I don't find that super interesting. For me, the fun is playing, and much less so like the crunchy build up. So they took all of that out of it for me, and I was like, fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, there's that. What does a good pre-made adventure do? It does the like boring hard stuff for you and frees you up to think of the fun stuff, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
Yeah.
stat blocks, absolutely, that's a big one.
Yeah, and I found I don't do a ton on D&D Beyond, but I have found people have created homebrew spells or homebrew items on there that they publish and make publicly available, and they're usually not perfect as written, but they're always like a really interesting. They start you thinking, right, when you are modifying, kind of like I guess what we use those published adventures for, like, hey, here's a cool thing, I don't think I need this long sword to do that exactly, but I see, let's do this instead. So
Yeah.
that's been a good resource.
So we should wrap up our conversation. We've been going for a little bit, but Jess, I wanted to ask you. So you recently had a player death, and we've talked a bit about this, but I want you to recount sort of the whole thing because this was your very first player death too, right?
It was.
You viciously murdered someone for no reason.
I did, because I'm the meanest. So this was my Tombs of Annihilation game. And like I said, these players we've been playing since level 1 in Mines of Phandelver. And the Mines of Phandelver, some people just chose pre-gen characters. So after we finished that, between the two, I let them switch things up. Maybe they met a monk on the road that they passed off their inheritance to, and the monk showed up for the, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So yes, this character had been with us in different forms for 2 or 2.5 years out of game. And it was the Firefinger adventure. The guide they chose had something she wanted out of Firefinger, which is this enormous tower in the middle of the jungle that is inhabited by terrafolk. And then it's a upside down dungeon, right? You're climbing up instead of climbing down. And each level has different stuff, and then you get to the top, and there's the flying terrafolk that you have to defeat to get the mask back for the guide, right? It was super fun. I found someone in the area had built a Firefinger out of foam board, and I found him on a Discord channel and bought that from him, which was great. So I had a 6 foot tall.
It was Aaron, right?
Yeah, it was Aaron. Yeah.
Okay. So we're talking about his topic and now talking about him. So,
yeah. So I bought a 6 foot tall foam Firefinger and had it on my kitchen table and stuff, which was very fun. And it took us, I think, 3 sessions to get to the top of it. I don't like playing for super long. I really only like to play 3 hours-ish. And so we got to the top, and part of it, so one of the players was picked up by a terrafolk, and then at the top of Firefinger there was a magical flame, and he was thrown into the magical flame, which brought him to 0 hit points, and then so I thought the flame did 3d6 damage. It does 10d6 damage. It does 3d6 if you stand next to it, if you start your turn within 10 feet of it. So that was me not reading the pre-written guide well enough. And so I'm looking, I probably, in hindsight, I probably should have just rolled 3d6. But, you're in the moment, you're juggling 12 different things. And I was like, oh, okay, it's 10d6. And that took him into the negatives that exceeded his total hit points. So it took 3 rounds for him. He was picked up he was grappled in the first round, picked up and dropped in the fire in the second round, and then took all the damage on the third round. So I don't know. It felt fair in that it had been a couple session build up. They knew it was a big fight. They had all, as people, asked me to make the encounters harder. So I was like, okay. But you feel, because the part of the game is that there's no resurrection, so it's not like we can just bring him back. He's gone. And I feel bad because he's one of those people who'd put a lot of thought into his character and had a lot of really interesting plot points. So I'm like, shoot, like I'm gonna have to think through some new ways to tie these people to this world, because he had a lot and he no longer has a lot. So
yeah,
was there a moment when it sank in that oh my goodness, this character could die for reals?
So it ended up that I think there was only one person left on top of the tower by the end of the encounter, which was actually fun. But I had 6 little tea lights set up for each PC, and it was my intention, if someone died, to blow one out. But he looked so sad. He looked so sad, and he was being so nice about it. He was being so polite, and I just did not have the heart to like pick it up and like blow it out in his face. But yeah, it's because he had said like, oh shoot, and we had like talked for a little bit. There's some chatter about death saving rolls, because we haven't really done a ton of those in game yet. So like, oh, what is that? Okay, that's this. Okay, you roll this. Okay. And then the next roll was the 10d6 damage that completely wiped him out. And some people knew that rule and some people didn't. So it was kind of a staggered moment when some people were like, well, he's already unconscious, it doesn't matter. And other people were like, oh no.
Oh my goodness.
So I just took his little mini and handed it to him, and
harsh.
yeah.
Did you demand his player character sheet and then rip it to shreds in front of him?
I did not.
Okay.
I did not. I felt bad though, because his character was a rogue, and I bought him some d6s with daggers on them for his sneak attack damage, and then I killed him before I could give them to him.
Yeah.
So it was.
So did you decide? Are you right? Because so like in game, right? You mentioned there's a curse, right? So no one can be resurrected. Are you gonna let them try to resurrect this character, or are they just gone?
Good question. Yeah. So my cleric pointed out, he flipped, and looked and realized that resurrection. The 5th level spell Resurrection can be done on someone who's been dead within the last 10 days. So it's actually worked out interestingly, because now they have a motivation. Now they're like, oh, if we can end this curse in 10 days, we can get our friend back. Which there's supposed to be kind of a timetable element to this adventure anyways, but it's surrounding an NPC they don't really care about, so that was... I had not really fleshed that out very much.
Yeah. That works out quite nicely.
Yeah, so now they have 10 days to go tearing through the jungle and try to track down this tomb, and try to resurrect their friend in time. So
that's so
it'll
good.
be fun.
It'll be fun. That sounds like such a great setup.
Yeah.
I mean, what a good way to handle that too.
Yeah.
So
well, congrats on your first kill.
Thank you. It felt okay, but not great.
Right. Yeah, thanks for telling us about that. Okay, so we need to replace the topic that we've just discussed. So, I don't know, do you have a chance to think about anything that you want to add?
I would be curious to know, and if you've already done something similar to this, let me know. But in what ways do you guys differentiate your NPCs for your players? Do you do different voices? Do you use images like from the pre-published guide? Like I've printed out the pictures of the NPCs and like distributed them sometimes, which gives them away as a person of interest, but is also, I think, just it's easier for people to connect with that. They're like, oh, we got a visual of this person now. We know, because I was not a theater kid. I do not like having attention on me. I don't like any of that. So I tend not to do voices very much. And I worry that makes my NPCs rather flat and uninteresting. So are you a theatrical person who just really like, here we go, we're just going to do all the voices and all the gimmicks? Or do you like create memorable characters in other ways? I would want to know.
I think that's a fantastic topic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm starting to realize too, as our topic gets cleared out, that more and more GMs are asking NPC questions, which makes me think we just need to have like NPC month.
That'd be fantastic.
Yeah, seriously.
Right. Yeah, or NPC year. Yeah, because that's really good. Because that's something that I try to think through a lot too, and probably don't do a great job. But like, this is a great topic to discuss, so we'll put it on there for sure.
And when in doubt, just go with a Mario and Luigi accent.
Classic.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jess, for coming on. This was super great. We really appreciate your time and your wisdom and all that. So, do you have anything that you want to talk about? I guess any upcoming things for you, or any any games that you're particularly excited about that you just want to be like, everybody needs to go play this?
Oh man, I saw that Bully Pulpit Games is releasing Fiasco as a card game, which kind of ties back to our discussion about the best format for games. And I'm so excited about that because Fiasco is one of my favorite games. It was one of the early role-playing games I played, and it is so poorly suited to a handbook.
Yes.
It is so poorly suited. And so I am so excited for the cards. So if you like horrible games about horrible people who end up in terrible places, check out Fiasco because it's a great time.
That's great. Yeah, Matt Wilson used that as a session 0 for a Trail of Cthulhu campaign.
That's fantastic. Oh my word.
A super great way to do it, right? It got us immediately sort of all connected as a group and lots of bad stuff happened and
fantastic.
All that. Yeah. All right. Well, again, thank you so much. I've been Chris Salzman.
I've been Andy Rao.
And this has been Roll for Topic. And remember, if your players are having fun, you're a great GM.